Hello and welcome to Taylor Talks Comics. Today is going to be a little bit of a different video. Today I'm going to be talking about the 5 most important comics in my collection. Stay tuned. And we're back. So I've been given this challenge by the Omnidog himself at Omnidog's Vault, Just Bragg. Go subscribe to his YouTube channel if you haven't already. I'll link his video down below so you know what I'm referring to, but this is the 5 favorite comic book challenge. I forget who started it. Just let me know. I know it's been passed around. I know Jake from Brave and the Boys did it, and I believe the Comic Book Report did it. I'm not sure. Some YouTube channels have done it. I think Bunkmaster B maybe, but I'm sure Jess can link. Maybe we should put a playlist together of everybody's reply. But anyways, this is the 5 most important comics to me in my collection. It's a very important distinction, or different distinction, the word important, because they're not necessarily my favorite or what I feel are the best. I think these distinctions are important when you're making lists like this, but it's still a very hard list regardless. I've obviously so many books in my collection. If you're a long-time subscriber, you know that. I like to show off comics from that run the whole gamut of styles and differences and whatnot. But I think I've narrowed it down. So I've got 5 for you today. So here's the first one. I should have noted too that these are not in any particular order. They're just my top 5 favorite. But first we have Jack Kirby's The Fourth World. Now there was no designation on if these could be 4 books or 5 books or 5 single issues or anything like that. It's pretty loose based on those terms. But I did have all of this in one omnibus at one time. You can see that on my channel. But I've since sold that off for these editions. Another topic for another day. But this is just one spot in my list, the entirety of Jack Kirby's Fourth World. It was hard to pick one Jack Kirby comic. I could have made a whole list of Jack Kirby comics in general, because he has been so influential in the medium of comics in so many different formats and so many different genres, romance, horror, sci-fi, superheroes. It wouldn't have been hard to pick 5 Jack Kirby books, but I just wanted to put one Kirby book on my list. You can, if longtime viewers know how important Kirby is to my comic book reading. But Jack Kirby's The Fourth World, which ran across 4 different titles, Superman's pal Jimmy Olsen, the New Gods, Mr. Miracle, and the Forever People, was this entire saga. It was epic in scope. It was, predated Star Wars and what we know as far as like the space operas that have come out years since. This was the 1970s. And this was Jack Kirby's leaving Marvel and going to DC to show that the Marvel universe was created by largely, the pencils and the imaginative nature of Jack Kirby and Steve Ditko's pencils. And Jack Kirby had kind of a chip on his shoulder when he went to DC and wanted to kind of prove that. And he created this world that is so epic in scope. It's so imaginative. Like almost every page of every issue, you're learning some sort of new world building aspect that Jack Kirby has created. And every time you read these stories, which I've read these a few times, and every time I revisit them, I see new things that I didn't realize before, or interpret things different ways. The rereading experience is so important, and I think this was a series. Why this is important to me was that this was a series that truly opened my eyes to what Jack Kirby was capable of, and this was kind of his magnum opus. And everything that he'd worked on in his comics career for the previous 3 decades had culminated in this, and so it's kind of like this opened my eyes, and then every other Kirby title that I've traveled down since has then been influenced through there, and every comic in general actually has been filtered through what I know and love about this series, because this is the pinnacle of comics in my opinion. Up next on the list I have The Incal by Mobius and Alejandro Jodorowsky. This to me opened my eyes to European comics, which is just a whole nother sector of comics that I was able to explore, and that's kind of how I feel anytime I go through little rabbit holes of exploring new comics, whether it be like manga, and it unlocks all these other, possibilities of manga that I could read. European comics was a similar vein, and it showed me that there are plenty of people around the world creating and writing comic book stories that are just as good as anything you find in the United States. This wasn't my first European comic that I read, but it was the one that unlocked that for me. And it since has put two people on my radar that then became more rabbit holes for me to explore, like Mobius, and finding out how influential he was to people that came after him. Kind of reminded me a little bit of when I first heard like Elvis Costello, when I first bought one of his albums, and I listened to it, and I was like, it unlocked for me, like, oh, this is, like, it was so influential to people that came after him that it was like, oh, this is what the bands and stuff that I listen to now were influenced by. Mobius is kind of the same way, like, how influential he is to so many different creators or artists. And then Alejandro Jodorowsky, the universe that he creates, starting with the Incal and then bleeds into the Metabarons and Techno Priests and a few other titles. It was similar to what I talked about with Jack Kirby in the Fourth World. Like, the world building he created, it just felt so lived in and so real, and everything made sense technically with how things worked in that world, that you could truly escape into it and explore things. And no matter what stage of life you're in, you could go back and revisit this and find new things about it that you didn't realize the first time. I wish the book cover was a little bit more interesting, but I flashed some pictures on here to show Mobius's great artwork. But yeah, this sent me down rabbit holes of learning all about Jodorowsky, which I have videos on my channel showing off all my Jodorowsky books. And then Mobius, anytime I can get a hold of a book with Mobius artwork is just amazing. So that's number 2 on my list, is the Incal. Next on my list is going to be Hate by Peter Bagge. This was one that when I guess, again, this is kind of unraveling or opening up new comics to explore. But when I discovered Peter Bagge's Hate, it was really opened my eyes to what comics could do, and they don't always have to be superheroes or crime or horror. This is kind of a slice of life story about Buddy Bradley here. And it ran all the way through from the 80s through the 90s, and it really grabbed a hold of that like grunge movement of the teenage angst of this character Buddy Bradley going from New Jersey to Seattle, and all the different hijinks of all the characters in his life, his family and friends. And it was the artwork that really gravitated to me first when I found a collection of Hate in a trade paperback collection in like a flea market. And just like seeing like the rubbery, cartoony looks to it, really, it made me want to know what the heck is this, because it was unlike any other comic I've ever seen. And it was just so funny. That's what I discovered from it after reading it. It was just such a funny comic, and probably one of the funniest comics I've read is anything Peter Bagge does. And he's one of my all-time favorite cartoonists for that reason. But just tapping into that vein of teenage angst, and it felt like all those adult comedy animated series that you like Family Guy and Simpsons stuff, like it taps into that vein, but I feel like it does it so much better. And then this opened my eyes to the Fantagraphics whole catalog. Fantagraphics is my favorite publisher of all time, so through Hate I then discovered 8 Ball by Dan Clowes and Love and Rockets by the Hernandez brothers, which are that's peeking there. That box set's peeking his head up right there over this one, and so much more. Fantagraphics. Longtime viewers of my channel know I talk about Fantagraphics relentlessly. So definitely Peter Bagge and Hate, and this is the box set that collects the entirety of the Hate catalog, except for now that Hate's revisited. A new series has come out from Peter Bagge, so whenever that comes in a collected edition, I'm going to have to put that with this box set. But this box set was put out by Fantagraphics, and when they did, I jumped at it, and I think I gave away that paperback to someone else. It just showed me comics can be funny, and that it makes comics enjoyable. So Hate is my number 3 most important comic in my collection. Number 4 most important comic to me is Roughneck by Jeff Lemire. So this one, I've told the story on my channel a few times, but I'll tell it again for any possible new viewers. By the way, you should give the video a thumbs up and subscribe if you haven't already. I'd really appreciate that. The thumbs up and the comments you can lay on the video can definitely help the algorithm and people find this video better and find my channel better on YouTube. But I digress. Roughneck by Jeff Lemire. So I spent about 5 years not reading comics. I'd been reading comics my whole life, since before I could even read. I was grabbing his comics and flipping through them before I even learned how to read. And then in my early 20s, you know, life happens for whatever happens, and you find different interests, and and I just didn't read comics for like five or 6 years, and I sold off most of my comics too at that point. But my wife, for my birthday, gave me a gift certificate to our local comic book shop here in town, and so on my birthday, I wanted to go to the comic book shop to explore, and I read Jeff Lemire's name a number of times because during that 5-year hiatus, one of my other hobbies during my lifetime and for my entire life was pro wrestling, and actually spent most of that time focusing on that hobby. I guess it's weird to express a hobby like that, but I actually even like wrote for a pro wrestling website, voicesofwrestling.com, which still exists, but I was just one of the writers on there, and so I got really deep into like European wrestling and Japanese wrestling. And one of my favorite wrestlers at the time was Zack Sabre Jr. So I followed him on social media, and he's always talking about Essex County by Jeff Lemire and posting about it. And even though I wasn't reading comics at the time, like it piqued my interest. So I went to the comic book shop with my gift certificate in hand, and I wanted to find Essex County. Like that's the one that over the last 5 years stuck out to me as something I was interested in, by Jeff Lemire. My shop didn't have it at the time, so I found Jeff Lemire's Roughneck instead, and I flipped through it, and I'm probably showing some of the artwork on the camera right now, and the artwork stood out to me. It was very like visceral, and it felt like you could just tell it was done by one hand and one imagination, and it had like almost like a Frank Miller quality to it in the line work, and it's just very interesting. So I was like, let's get this book, and we went home, and that night I spent the entire night reading it all in one sitting, and it laid such an impression on me that it just tugged at my heartstrings in different ways, and it was like the violence was very like serious and raw, and like the story was about these flawed characters really spoke to me. So then the rest of the weekend we went to other shops and half price books and all these things, and I wanted to buy anything that I could get my hands on that had Jeff Lemire's name on it. And since then, this comic book collection has grown, and my YouTube channel has now become a thing, and it sent me all down these paths back to comics, to where now it's my favorite hobby that I spent most of my spare time dabbling in, and it was all due to this book. So Jeff Lemire and Roughneck are to blame for this comic book collection. But yeah, this one it's important for that reason. I don't know if I'd be back in the hobby if this book didn't grip me that way. If I bought something else that day that maybe it was just like, okay, that's a decent comic. Because I was trying to find, I wanted a comic, because I was so far behind on like modern DC and Marvel comics that I was like, there's no way I can buy anything from there. I'm so lost in all the reboots and soft reboots and everything like that. I had to find something that was not Marvel or DC. So yeah, like if it was a comic that didn't grab me, that I bought instead, maybe I wouldn't have gone down this path. I don't know, but this has since sent me down. Jeff Lemire is one of my favorite writers and artists. Black Hammer is one of my favorite series. I have a video on my channel for that reading order. Essex County, I subsequently got that, and it was great. But yeah, Jeff Lemire is amazing. Absolutely cannot recommend the majority of his catalog enough. Last but not least, we have Watchmen. This is the Absolute Edition, and this is what I think is like the absolute greatest comic book of all time, which is not some sort of radical or hot take type of opinion. It is much heralded. It's like the only novel that made the Time magazine top 100 novels of all time list. No, it's no shock, I'm sure, that it's on this list. It's probably on a lot of other people's. But this is the comic book I've read the most and reread the most. I first came across this in my teenage years. I think my older brother told me about it, probably introduced me to the idea of Watchmen, because I didn't read a lot of like comic book magazines like Wizard and Comics Journal back in my younger days to teen years. And the internet was around, obviously. I'm not that old, but it wasn't like something I scoped out was like comic book forums and that kind of thing. So I obviously had heard of Watchmen, but I relied on my brother, I guess, mostly to inform me of what's the good stuff. And this is one of them. He said Watchmen's amazing. So I read it for the first time as a teenager. And I don't know that I quite grasped it, but I knew what people were talking about when people said, like, this is one of the greatest comic books of all time. Like, it felt like I was, like, the first, if you watch, like, Citizen Kane as, like, a young teen or something, you don't quite understand why everyone talks about how it's so great. And I think it has a lot to do with the experience you have as a comic book reader, because you have to understand what Alan Moore and Dave Gibbons were doing with, and Higgins, I should say, the colorist, what they were doing with the medium of comics and how they were deconstructing the medium and everything that was told thereafter, everything that came before, and then like setting the ground floor for everything that would come after, and showing these characters of these superheroes in a light that superheroes were never shown before. It felt so different. And Dave Gibbons did an amazing job with the artwork as well, making it look different. It didn't feel like anything else that I've ever written or read. Sorry, any other comic I've ever read. And so I knew it was special, but I didn't quite understand. So I kept rereading it. And I feel like I've read it like once a year at least, probably for every year that I've read comics. I revisit Watchmen, and I pull something else out of it or notice new things about it that they were doing that weren't quite so obvious. And I've read like all of the back history of it with, like, I've been watching the Watchmen behind the scenes book and the companion. I've read Watchmen in different formats, like the Noir edition, the Absolute edition, single issues. And I tried to like deconstruct this book in its own right, to try to figure out, kind of reverse engineer what they were doing with this story and with comics in general. And I have so many strong opinions about how Moore and Gibbons weren't just deconstructing comics to like make fun of it or to destroy the medium. They were trying to rip it down and say, okay, we've told all the stories we need to tell from in that perspective. Now let's build upon that and go into another light. And I feel like there's some writers that have misinterpreted that and said like, oh, raw, violent, adult, mature, like these are what comics are supposed to be. That's not necessarily what they're getting at, but it did have that nature to it, where it was also violent and raw and mature. So it felt a little bit like I was reading something I wasn't supposed to when I was a teenager. But it's just something I revisit all the time, and it definitely is like the peak of comics. It's number one, and it's the filter that I go through when I read any other comic itself is like, Watchmen's the peak, so then how does this kind of compare? And that's for better or worse. It's what you do when you listen to the Beatles for the first time, and music is forever changed in your ears because you understand what the peak of music is. Same thing for this. Same thing for whatever you think the best movie of all time is. But yeah, Watchmen. So that's it. That's the 5 most important comics of my collection that I have in my life. So now I'm supposed to challenge someone else to keep the ball rolling, keep this tradition alive. Like I said, Jess Bragg of Omnidog's Vault challenged me. It's the point of this video. So now I'm going to challenge Larry's Library over on YouTube. So subscribe to his channel and stay tuned. Hit those notifications on his channel as well, so you can see when his video pops up. Hopefully it does relatively soon. But Larry's a guy that's been reading comics for a number of years as well, and I enjoy his content. And one of the comic book YouTubers that I'm most fascinated or interested in his likes and dislikes about comics. And we both have, in conversations we've had in chats of live videos when I go live and whatnot, he's expressed to me that we both love like 70s Marvel and stuff. And he's put on his channel things that he loves, like Marvel's Godzilla and Micronauts and these other kind of more niche things in the Marvel universe. But I'd be interested in knowing the 5 most important comics of his life, of his collection. So, Larry, the gauntlet's been thrown down. The challenge is yours. And everybody, thank you for watching this video. Please subscribe, give the video a thumbs up, comment down below. I want to hear what your 5 most favorite ones are too. Larry isn't the only one that has to answer. You can answer too. So comment down below with your answers. I'd appreciate that. And everyone, keep reading comics.